Solomon, though widely recognized as one of the greatest monarchs in biblical history, carries with him a complex and nuanced narrative that is not always fully explored. In many respects, he is remembered as a ruler with a heart deeply devoted to God, but also as someone whose later choices would bring about consequences that tarnished his legacy. The Bible, in its wisdom and impartiality, does not conceal the flaws of its heroes of faith, and Solomon's story is a clear example of this approach. When we think of kings exalted in Scripture, Solomon's name inevitably comes to mind. He was not only seen as a man of great wisdom, but also as someone who actively sought the divine will, offering 1,000 burnt offerings to God in Gibeon, a city of great significance to the Israelites. It is this combination of devotion and wisdom that makes him a fascinating figure, but his story is far more than just these grand achievements. Solomon, son of King David, was a man whose life was marked by extraordinary choices, but also by decisions that eventually led to his downfall. He is often remembered for his immense wisdom, a wisdom that not only helped consolidate peace and prosperity in Israel, but also made him an impartial judge and a remarkable conciliator, as detailed in passages like 1 Kings 3, 3-14. He became famous for his ability to resolve complex disputes, such as the famous story of the two women who claimed to be the mother of the same child, an episode that reflects the depth of his discernment. But who was Solomon, really? What caused him to fail, despite his great wisdom and divine favor? His life began with great promise. In the early years of his reign, Solomon was guided by the influence of his father David, who, despite his own shortcomings, always had a heart turned toward God. During David's reign, he laid the groundwork for Israel's future. Solomon, in turn, not only followed in his father's footsteps, but was also blessed with a unique opportunity, the chance to ask God for anything he desired. It was in a moment of deep humility and worship that Solomon, after offering 1,000 sacrifices at the altar in Gibeon, sought divine direction for his leadership. That night, in a dream, God appeared to him. The Lord offered him an extraordinary gift. "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." Solomon's choice at that decisive moment was profound and revealing. He did not ask for riches or a long life, nor for the defeat of his enemies, as many might expect from a young king newly come to power. Instead, Solomon asked for a wise and discerning heart so that he could govern his people with justice and understanding. He saw himself as inexperienced, almost like a child before the greatness of Israel, a vast people chosen by God. God, pleased with Solomon's humility and wisdom, not only granted his request, but went even further, promising him a wisdom unmatched among the kings of the earth. Yet this divine response came with an additional promise: riches, honor, and a peerless position among monarchs. Solomon would become the most powerful king of his generation, provided he remained faithful to God's commandments and laws, as his father David had done. The promise of a long life was also given to him, as long as he walked in obedience. This moment represents the pinnacle of Solomon's story, a story filled with wisdom, success, and prosperity. Yet, as we will see throughout his journey, Solomon's path was not without its challenges. He had 1,000 wives and concubines, and his personal choices, often influenced by these relationships, ultimately became one of the causes of his downfall. The political and marital alliances that initially seemed wise and prudent ended up having devastating consequences for his faith and for the kingdom of Israel. Solomon, the king who gained fame and respect, was not only a powerful monarch, but also a profound thinker whose wisdom echoed through generations. His renown spread not only because of the wealth and prosperity he brought to Israel, but also because of the learning and discernment that made him an unparalleled figure. He is credited as the author of some of the Bible's most revered books, including Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs. Each of these works is filled with timeless lessons, still touching the hearts of modern scholars and readers today. The wisdom of Solomon is expressed in phrases that are true pearls, rich in depth, applicability, and reverence for God. In Proverbs 5:1-2, he gives advice with the maturity of a man who understood life's complexity. "My son, pay attention to my wisdom. "Turn your ear to my words of insight, that you may maintain discretion, and your lips may preserve knowledge." At another point, in Proverbs 9:10, he speaks about the essence of knowledge and wisdom, saying, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and knowledge of the Holy One is understanding." Furthermore, in Ecclesiastes 3:1, he reflects on the nature of time and life, recognizing God's divine wisdom in all that happens. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. With these words, Solomon conveys a deep understanding of the human relationship with the Creator and with time, something that transcends generations and remains a source of reflection. As he contemplates the eternity that God placed in the human heart, he also highlights the limits of human understanding regarding divine mysteries. At the height of his wisdom, Solomon was a figure difficult to ignore and easy to admire. His fame spread beyond the borders of Israel, and many people, both near and far, sought his counsel. This is powerfully illustrated in the account of his meeting with the Queen of Sheba, an event made famous by the magnitude of what was exchanged between them. As recorded in 1 Kings 10:1-18, this meeting symbolizes the reverence Solomon had earned. Upon hearing of his wisdom and his relationship with God, the Queen of Sheba decided to travel to Jerusalem to see for herself whether the reports were true. With a grand caravan of camels bearing spices, gold, and precious stones, she approached Solomon's court. Perhaps seeking more than just material wealth, she brought with her all her deepest questions and riddles. For each one, Solomon gave clear, insightful, and unmatched answers, deeply impressing her. Not only his wisdom, but also the splendor of his court left her astonished. She saw the magnificence of his palace, the grandeur of the royal table, the harmony of the attendants, and the dedication of his servants, and she was overwhelmed. She admitted that the reports had not even conveyed half of what she witnessed. In her own words, she said she hadn't believed what she heard until she saw it with her own eyes, and confessed, "Indeed, not even half was told me. In wisdom and wealth, you have far exceeded the report I heard." This meeting was not merely an exchange of words or wisdom. It was also a public acknowledgement of the divine blessing upon Solomon's life. The Queen of Sheba praised the Lord God, who in his love for Israel had placed Solomon on the throne to govern with justice and righteousness. As a sign of deep appreciation, she gifted the king with 120 talents of gold, a vast amount of spices, and precious stones, gifts so magnificent that the Bible records no spices like them had ever been seen before. And Solomon's contribution to this exchange was no less. He not only granted all of the queen's requests, but also surpassed her gifts, giving her even more than she had brought. At the end of the encounter, the queen and her entourage returned to their homeland, carrying with them an image of Solomon that would undoubtedly be remembered as a symbol of wisdom and prosperity. The story of the Queen of Sheba's visit reflects the richness and impact of Solomon's reign, riches not only material, but also spiritual and intellectual. Each year, Solomon received 666 talents of gold, a symbolic number of his immense wealth. To this were added the tributes of merchants, traders, Arabian kings, and governors of nearby territories, further solidifying his influence and fortune. Solomon did not merely accumulate riches, he used them to adorn and elevate his kingdom. He had 200 large shields of hammered gold made, each weighing 600 shekels, and 300 smaller shields, each weighing about 3 kilograms, all displayed in the renowned palace of the Forest of Lebanon. It is not difficult to imagine the grandeur of such ornaments, a reflection of the luxury and splendor that characterized Solomon's reign. In addition, the king commissioned the creation of a majestic throne, overlaid with ivory and covered in fine layers of gold, an unmistakable symbol of his power, his wisdom, and his connection with the divine. This throne was more than a luxurious object. It represented Solomon's authority and justice, underpinned by the wisdom God had granted him to govern his people with equity. In all these accomplishments, the image of Solomon emerges as that of a wise, prosperous, and highly admired king. But as we shall see, Solomon's story is not only one of success, it is also one of caution, for even the greatest wisdom cannot shield one from the consequences of straying from true faithfulness to God. Though Solomon's life is filled with wisdom and magnificent deeds, his story also contains dark and morally troubling elements. The Bible does not shy away from exposing the flaws of its heroes, and in Solomon's case, the account of his personal choices and spiritual deviations serves as a reflection on how even the greatest among men can fall. One of the most surprising and controversial aspects of his life was his involvement with an overwhelming number of foreign women, as detailed in 1 Kings 11-13. Solomon, the king whose wisdom and wealth were unquestionable, loved many women from foreign nations, including Moabites, Ammonites, Sidonians, and Hittites, and he also married Pharaoh's daughter. These were the very nations about which God had warned Israel, instructing them not to intermarry, as such unions could lead them to follow other gods. God's warning was not merely cultural, but spiritual in nature. Foreign women could turn the hearts of the Israelites away from exclusive worship of the Lord. Despite this divine instruction, Solomon clung to these women, forging political and personal alliances, often ignoring God's warnings. He had 700 wives, all of royal lineage, and 300 concubines, forming a harem of women who, over time, had a negative influence on him. The presence of these foreign wives and their religious customs began to turn Solomon's heart. What had begun as a strategy for political security and international alliance opened the door to spiritual unfaithfulness. The temptation to follow the gods of his wives led Solomon to compromise his devotion to the Lord. He began to worship Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Moloch, the detestable god of the Ammonites. Even though he had been chosen by God to govern Israel, Solomon did what was evil in the Lord's sight, and his loyalty to God was no longer complete. Unlike his father David, who, despite his own failures, maintained a heart devoted to the Lord, Solomon allowed idols and foreign influences to corrupt his faith and weaken his obedience to divine commandments. The peak of this spiritual decline came when Solomon built high places for these foreign gods. On a hill east of Jerusalem, he erected an altar for Chemosh, the god of Moab, and for Molech, the god of the Ammonites. These worship practices were deeply repugnant to God, especially since Molech was associated with child sacrifice, an abominable act. Solomon, once known for his wisdom and devotion, had now immersed himself in practices that led Israel away from the true worship of the Lord. This spiritual downfall did not go unnoticed. The Lord, who had appeared to Solomon on 2 occasions, became angry with him. Though God had personally warned him not to follow other gods, Solomon disobeyed. As a result, the Lord made a grave declaration. He would tear the kingdom away from Solomon and give it to one of his servants. However, for the sake of David, Solomon's father, this punishment would not occur during Solomon's lifetime. Instead, after Solomon's death, the kingdom of Israel would be divided. One of his sons would lose control over a significant part of the kingdom, but one tribe would remain under his lineage, for the sake of David, God's faithful servant, and for the sake of the chosen city, Jerusalem. The end of Solomon's reign is a sobering reminder that turning away from obedience to God can lead to the loss of blessings and privileges. His failure to discipline his desires and his pursuit of foreign alliances distanced God from both his life and the nation of Israel. From a king who began with unmatched wisdom and a deep covenant with the Lord, he became a tragic figure, his unfaithfulness undermining all he had built. The decline of Solomon's reign reflects the consequences of the choices he made, allowing worldly distractions and alliances to draw his heart away from God. The same man who, in his youth, had asked for wisdom to govern justly, ultimately became seduced by wealth, power, and relationships that led him away from divine truth. Jeroboam, a man of humble origins, emerged as a prominent figure in the history of Israel, especially as described in 1 Kings 11:2, 8-40. At first, he was a servant of Solomon, but his talent and capability were quickly recognized by the king, who placed him in a position of great responsibility, overseeing the entire labor force of the tribes of Joseph. This not only reflected Solomon's trust in Jeroboam, but also the potential the young man held for great accomplishments. However, Jeroboam's destiny took an unexpected turn when he encountered the prophet Ahijah of Shiloh, a man of God who, at their meeting, was wearing a new cloak. This encounter took place in a secluded field, where Ahijah performed a symbolic and powerful act. He tore the cloak into 12 pieces and gave 10 of them to Jeroboam. The message from the prophet was clear and impactful. "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says, I am going to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand and give you 10 tribes." According to the word of the Lord, Solomon's once unshakable kingdom would be divided. However, part of it would be preserved. The reason lay in the legacy of David, God's faithful servant, and in the city of Jerusalem, which God had chosen as the center of worship and his divine presence. For this reason, God decided not to take the entire kingdom from Solomon during his lifetime. One tribe would remain under the rule of Solomon's son, keeping a lamp before the Lord in Jerusalem. God's choice of Jeroboam to rule over 10 tribes was a direct response to Solomon's corruption and unfaithfulness, particularly his worship of Molech, the god of the Ammonites, which marked the king's failure to follow God's decrees faithfully. Solomon, who had begun his reign with deep devotion to the Lord, ended his life distant from God, allowing idolatrous practices to dominate his reign and turn his heart away. God's promise to Jeroboam was great. If he would remain faithful, obey the Lord's commandments, act justly, and follow the divine statutes, as David had done, God would be with him, would build him a lasting dynasty, and would grant him rule over Israel. This promise of a lasting lineage was a divine opportunity for Jeroboam, placing him at the center of a plan that would alter the history of the kingdom. But this promise also came with a critical condition: obedience. God made it clear that Jeroboam's success depended on his faithfulness. Though his future as king looked bright, disobedience would bring serious consequences. Jeroboam's new path was not without obstacles. Solomon himself, fearing the young man's rise and its implications for his own reign, sought to kill Jeroboam. In response, Jeroboam fled to Egypt and found refuge with King Shishak. He remained in exile until Solomon's death, waiting for the right moment to return and take his place as leader of the 10 tribes of Israel. After Solomon died, his son Rehoboam inherited the kingdom. But, as God had foretold, the unity of Israel was broken. The kingdom was divided, and Jeroboam became the ruler of the 10 northern tribes, while Rehoboam ruled over 1 tribe, in fulfillment of God's promise to David. Solomon, who at the beginning of his reign ruled with great wisdom and divine favor, died as a king who, in his final years, saw his authority weakened and the kingdom he built torn apart. In the end, he no longer ruled over all 12 tribes of Israel, but only 1. The dream of a united kingdom under his leadership was shattered. The story of Jeroboam and Solomon is a powerful reminder of the consequences of unfaithfulness and disobedience to God. Even those who begin with great blessings and wisdom can see their lives and kingdoms collapse if they do not remain faithful to God's principles. On the other hand, Jeroboam's rise to leadership over the 10 tribes of Israel demonstrates how God's sovereignty operates even amid disobedience, bringing new opportunities and new responsibilities to those called to lead. As we reach the end of this journey, I invite you to reflect on the choices we make each day. In the light of Solomon's wisdom, may we understand that our decisions, ethical or spiritual, not only shape our destiny, but also the destiny of those who come after us. I hope this deep dive into the life of Solomon has touched your heart. If this kind of reflection resonated with you, feel free to share your thoughts and suggestions for the next steps on this journey together. May the divine light be with you. See you soon.
From now on, each of our videos will come with a special guide to help deepen your spiritual journey. With every new video, we lovingly select 10 biblical inspirations to bring comfort and peace to your soul. It's a motivational and inspiring resource. created with care especially for you, who are always with us. And by purchasing this ebook for a symbolic price, you're also helping us continue creating the high-quality content our subscribers truly deserve. The link is in the description.